So now we're going to hand it over to Sujata Bansal. She's an infant and early childhood mental health specialist with West Ed. She co-leads the development of the statewide IECMH Consultation Training and Certification Program. She has 25 years of experience in teaching, training, providing direct therapy, consulting, and program administration. Her areas of expertise include early care and education, contract and grant management, training and facilitation, and early childhood mental health. Prior to joining West Ed, she has spent 18 years at First Five Alameda County, where she led the development of a county-wide ECMH consultation program, as well as playing an integral role in the development and implementation of Alameda County's QRIS program. She's received a BA in psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MA in clinical psychology from the University of Colorado, Denver. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California and is conversationally fluent in Spanish and Hindi. I would like to introduce you folks to Sujata Bansal. Thank you, Sujata, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Leah. I'm so excited to be here. As Catherine said, before I joined West Ed about 2 or 3 years ago, I was actually with First Five Alameda County for 18 years. And so it feels really nice to be back with these folks and to be able to present today. I am going to actually jump right in because we only have 2 hours together, and there's a lot of great information. And we also have some folks who are going to be speaking. We have a video, so I want to make sure we get time for everything. So I will jump right in. I want to keep things kind of casual. So, if you have a question, as Leah said, please do put it in the chat. I will try and monitor it, but I'll also ask Leah and Catherine to help monitor and stop me if something needs explanation or needs to be answered. There will also be time at the end for question and answers, so we can utilize both methods. And we're not going to be taking a formal break because we only have the 2 hours, but feel free if you need to get up, stretch, go use the restroom, absolutely feel free to do that. Take care of what you need to. And yeah, so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And let's see, I can advance slides. So we will be covering, we did the welcome and intros. We're going to be talking about culture in our work. I'll be sharing a little bit of the psychometric data and research from the ASQ tools. That'll actually be repetitive information that was talked about in the ASQ and the ASQ SE trainings that you've all attended previously. So those will just be for a quick review. Then we'll talk about culture and self-awareness, working with diverse families, and then go ahead and close. So that's what we hope to get covered today. And I'm going to actually start with a short story. So the picture that you see here, these are of some of my cousins, some of my many cousins who live in India. This picture was taken, oh gosh, probably almost 30 years ago. I had just graduated from college, undergrad, and had gone back to India. I wanted to live there for a short time just to really immerse myself back in the culture and spend time with extended family. So I was spending a lot of time with aunts and uncles and cousins. And this little guy that you see right in the middle, he is one of the younger of the cousins. And he was the type of kid who walked into a room and immediately caused chaos. He would jump on you. He would want to wrestle with you. He would knock things over. He was like a little tornado everywhere he went. And, it got to the point where, his dad and, the other adults would always be, yelling at him to stop and to try and distract him or discipline him. And you'll see that, there he is with his 3, one of those is his brothers and the other 2 are his cousins. And at one point, his father, who is my uncle, asked me, said, oh, you've just graduated, you're studying child psychology. What can we do? Why does he act this way? And I felt very, like flattered that, here he is in my culture to have an older male ask me for my opinion on something. And, I felt very proud that I was going to be able to share my knowledge. And I said to him, one thing that I notice is that you are all always comparing him to his older brothers and cousins. And the way that they would do that is they would often comment that Akshay, that's his name, Akshay was so small that he looked kind of fragile and weak. He was, underweight, and that he didn't look as strong and healthy as his older brothers and cousins. And I said, I wonder if because he keeps hearing that, he's trying to show how tough he is, how big and tough he is, and how strong he is. And that's why he's always walking into a room and challenging everybody to like fight and show, how tough he is. And I felt very, confident in that. And, like, oh, I had hit on something. And it was so interesting to me. It was such an aha moment because my uncle said to me, basically the translation is, that he thought that was ridiculous. And that the reason that they tell him these things is because if they didn't tell him, who else would? Like, that is the role of the family to tell him that these are the things, like in my culture, in my family's culture, it is a sign of health and wealth to kind of look, tall and, a little big. And so they were really, feeling like this is for the betterment of him. Like he will have better chance in life if they tell him these things and he works to improve that about himself. And it just was such an aha moment for me because it made me realize that, we come in, here I was with my like Western training and my Western ideas around child development and how interactions should happen and how kids should be talked to, but that doesn't translate to other cultures necessarily, and that other cultures have different values. And so it's something that I just always held on to as a reminder of not walking in with assumptions or with an idea of a best practice necessarily, and that different things work for different families and for different cultures. So I just kind of wanted to set the stage with that personal learning that I had gone through. So having said that, why are we here today and what do we hope to achieve? And so one of the things that we had asked folks to do in advance of this training is to fill out a short pre-survey asking folks, about your experiences with the ASQ and what you hope to get out of it. And so I want to just, let folks know that this is going to be an interactive training. I want to hear, I have a lot of stories that I can share about using the ASQ with different families and adaptations that I've made. We also have some folks as participants who are going to speak up and share their experiences. And I hope that others of you who also have experiences to share, either as a administrator of the tool or as a recipient, will speak up and share with all of us the different considerations that you've taken into account as you've used these tools in your work. So having said that, we're going to actually watch a short video clip that will help illustrate a little bit about the role of culture in our work.
Thank you. It's truly an honor to be here. I would like to start my talk today with a little exercise, introducing you to a person named Pat. Pat is 31 years old and lives at home with one sibling and their parents. Pat has always lived in the family home and would not consider moving out to live alone, except after getting married. Pat's parents always play a significant role in making decisions about all aspects of Pat's life, including education, work decisions, Pat's friendships, and romantic life. This has been the case since Pat was a child. Pat rarely makes decisions without consulting family members and rarely expresses disagreement with others out of fear of disapproval or loss of support. Pat feels very uncomfortable when alone and tends to cling to others out of fear of being abandoned. Now take a moment to picture Pat. Are you picturing a young man? A young woman? Are you picturing a person of a particular ethnic or cultural background, maybe similar to your own, or different? And consider for a moment whether such information would make a difference in how you think about Pat, and whether or not you think that Pat might have some kind of mental health concern. Now, what if I added the following information, specifying that Pat is Patricia Lee, and that she and her family immigrated to Canada from China when she was 5 years old? Or the following, where Pat is Patrick Smith, whose maternal and paternal grandparents immigrated to Canada from the United Kingdom, and whose parents grew up in the Toronto area. Judging from some faces that I can see, this information indeed makes a difference in how you think about Pat. Simply adding some basic demographic information can significantly shift how we think about the very same behaviors. This exercise has elicited similar responses in my classroom when I have used it in teaching about personality disorders, which offer a particularly striking example of the need to consider cultural factors when defining mental illness, since they are themselves defined by patterns of behavior that deviate from cultural expectations. I used this exercise to introduce the role of cultural factors in thinking about mental health and illness, and to introduce the central idea that culture matters. In my experience, once introduced to this idea, people seem to intuitively know that culture makes a difference when thinking about mental health and mental illness. Without specifically talking about cultural differences in things like parent-child relationships, independence and interdependence, or assertiveness, we seem to just know that it makes a difference if we're talking about Patricia or Patrick. But not only does culture matter when it comes to mental health, it is fundamental. Many people, including myself, argue that a culturally informed approach is really critical to effective healthcare, and that only by including cultural factors in our discussions of this field will we truly make advances. Recently, a group of medical and social scientists writing in one of the world's most prestigious medical journals stated the following: that the systematic neglect of culture in health and healthcare is the single biggest barrier to the advancement of the highest standard of health worldwide. A pretty powerful statement. So, this is great. I see a number of you nodding, and you seem to be in agreement that reflecting on Pat illustrates for you, at least at a basic level, the importance of considering cultural questions when it comes to mental health. But stopping here would be problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, I still have 15 minutes and 52 seconds left on the clock. But more importantly, stopping here could serve to reinforce certain cultural stereotypes, contrasting the Lees versus the Smiths, and would not really leave you with any idea of how to actually go about considering cultural factors. Or worse, it might leave you with an overly simplistic idea of how to do this, suggesting perhaps that simply knowing a person's ethnic background or immigration history provides enough information to really understand the meaning of their behaviors and relationships. So acknowledging that culture matters is a crucial initial step, sort of like a first piece of a puzzle. But we need to go much further. So if knowing Pat's cultural background is like having a first piece of the puzzle, much more needs to be learned before getting even close to a complete picture. For example, based on common cultural ideas, you may have had the sense that the description of Pat's behavior became somehow more acceptable when it was Patricia, a young woman of Chinese-Canadian background, compared to Patrick, a young man and second-generation Canadian of British descent. However, although interdependence and social harmony are values more commonly endorsed among people of Chinese background compared to Western European background? Is it necessarily the case that Patricia's parents are happy with her level of dependence upon them? Maybe their migration to Canada was partially driven by their own traits of independence, and they are really quite concerned that their daughter has not developed greater autonomy or self-reliance. Maybe Patricia has never felt that she fits in among her peers and really feels incapable of attaining the level of independence as encouraged by her parents. On the other hand, although independence and autonomy are commonly endorsed values in North America, maybe it's normative within Patrick's family to defer to one's parents and to view life decisions as communal endeavors. These examples illustrate that we cannot simply make sweeping assumptions about people purely based on their cultural background, nor can we make simple comparisons or distinctions between people simply because they're from different contexts.
Thank you. Just before we get into this next activity, I just want to pause and see any thoughts or what's coming up for you after watching that short clip.
I was going to say the thing that struck me was the need to ask more questions, to not just make an assumption that, oh, that's just how it is, but to dig a little deeper.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you get presented with a set of a piece of information, but then needing to know more, right?
Just to piggyback on that, I was going to say that I do agree, just more questions, but not just ethnic background questions, but it also made me think about, like, what is the family structure? What is the dynamics? What is the impact of maybe spiritual religious practices? Because every culture is different, even if they are within the same area. Every family is different and unique. So just to ask those follow-up questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is why I really liked how she went deeper and said, yeah, you could just, if we stopped here, it might be reinforcing some stereotypes, right? But then when you go deeper and you ask more about what is it that your family values, is this of concern to you specifically, then you would get another level of information, right? If we had stopped kind of just at, well, Patricia versus Patrick, then we might just be reinforcing some common stereotypes. Yeah, which is why I really wanted to, I was trying to think, like, how much of this video should I show? And I was like, no, that's really important what she talks about in the last 2 minutes. So anything else that stood out for you? Okay. All right, so what we're going to do next is you will be shown a series of photographs, and each photograph will be up for just 5 seconds. And your task is just to look at the pictures and notice what you feel or what kind of reaction you're having to each of them. So we'll just go through all of the photos and then pause at the end to hear from you. So Leah, am I going to be doing this part, or will you?
Oh, you are welcome to if you would like to.
Okay, sure. I'll go ahead and start it. Okay, so what did you notice as you were looking through each of those photos? Feel free to just unmute and speak up. What did you notice? Any reactions, any thoughts? All right, we have something in the chat. Some are super cute and show love between caregivers and children. Yeah.
For some of the some of the pictures, some questions came up to my mind, and for others, some thoughts about past experiences.
Can you say more about the past experiences, Myra?
So during COVID, one time I was helping translate for occupational therapy session. And the child was close to being 3, and all of a sudden he comes to his mom wanting to breastfeed, and I didn't see anything wrong with it, but the occupational therapist made a lot of comments after the session. Oh, how come he's still breastfeeding, we should give information to mom, and like many things. And I was like, okay.
Right. And in that session, did anybody ask the mom questions about that, about her, okay,
Nothing.
her choices? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that sounds like a place where, and there was just a comment in the chat about, the concern of feeding a child who looks, quite a bit older or beyond the toddler age. And yeah, I mean, that's a, culturally tied thing around, how long should children breastfeed, and whether or not to, there's the whole thing around, breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, and at what point to stop, and how that can be very culturally tied, or tied to, what other resources does a family have. Maybe they don't have resources for other types of foods or nutrition. So yeah, it's interesting, and these are all different family choices, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of goes back to one of the very first comments that was made. I think Leah had spoken up about needing to ask more questions when we see something that causes a reaction or makes us think, that's different, or that's not how I would do it, or that's not how I was trained. That's an opening or an opportunity to ask some questions there. Anything else that came up for folks before we move on? The spanking picture, yeah. So that's something, right, that we're especially trained around, never raising a hand to a child. And, we even have legal guidelines around that. And yet in other cultures, disciplining a child in that way, or that is seen as a way to discipline a child. And so that's something that, I think often comes up as a working with parents and talking to them about discipline when we are working in this country and with these standards can often cause a lot of tension. Okay. So when you think of culture and the ASQ tools, what comes up for you? So what are some of the things for those of you who, I know when we did the pre-survey, there were many of you said that you're fairly new to using the ASQ, and then some who said that you were intermediate, and a few people said you were very experienced users. So for each of those groups, what comes up for you when you think about using that tool, and the need to be, culturally aware?
Hi. So I wanted to say when I think of culture and the ASQs, I definitely think of trying my best to be mindful and trying my best to be open-minded at the same time, because what may or may not make sense to me, or, I might not do with my children, or I wasn't brought up doing certain things. It's making it, for me, the tools is making it make sense and helpful for the family to use. And how can we look at it or tweak it, I guess you could say, to still do what it needs to do, but also be appropriate and accessible in ways to help make sure the family feels respected and taken care of, and the children get the developmental milestones and making sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to do within the age range, and if not, getting them the services that they need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You articulated that really nicely, Angelina. I appreciate you sharing. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that, when I used to train on the ASQ and other tools, I'd always say there is no such thing as a tool that's culturally appropriate for every culture out there. It doesn't exist, right? There's no way to make sure that a tool will meet the needs of every culture out there. And so the tool is only as good as the user. And so if you want to make the tool appropriate for a family and meet their needs, as Angelina is explaining, then as the user, it's on us to make sure that we are taking into consideration where this tool might be appropriate and where it might not, where it's reflective and where it's not. And one of the really nice things about the ASQ, one of the reasons I actually really like this tool, is it's a screener. It's not an assessment. And so that allows for play. It allows for some flexibility that doesn't exist always in more formal assessment tools. And so, as you all have gone through the training, the ASQ tools training, you know that, for example, you can omit certain items if they're not appropriate. You can even change certain items as long as the intent of the question stays true. You can change, certain aspects of the question. And so there are ways that you can adapt it if something feels culturally inappropriate. One of the examples I give is I was using the tool with a family of Indian descent, Hindi speaking. And I walk into this house, and as is often the custom with Indian and many Asian families, you leave your shoes at the door. So which I did, and I come in and I'm using the tool. And one of the questions on this particular tool was, if you give your child a set of directions, will they follow it, such as put the shoes on the table? And, I don't know many families that would want shoes on a table, but I knew for sure that that would not be something that this family would feel comfortable with. But the intent of the question is just to see if the child can follow a simple set of directions, and particularly the understanding of putting something on top of something else. And so that was an easy switch, right? I just switched shoes to books and, made that, and it still captured the intent of the question. And so the ASQ really allows for those types of modifications and adaptations. And one of the things you have in your packet of handouts is actually I believe it's a one-pager that kind of goes through and talks about how you can do modifications and adaptations, and also how to use the tool with families that speak other languages that the tool is not translated into. And so those are some good reference materials. And yeah, thank you. Leah's put the link to the materials in the chat a couple of times.
Sujata, when you're talking about adapting like that, how would you communicate that to families when they're doing their screener? Like, you know, a family sees that same example in the form. So how would you communicate that to them, like about adapting appropriately?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in cases where, you know, when I was administering the tool, I was almost always doing it with the family. So I'd bring the tool with me and we would do it together. And so that allows for the user of the tool to make those adaptations. But in the example you're talking about, Amy, the family is just, you know, given the tool and asked to do it on their own. So I think in that case, it's really important that the person who is handing the family the tool, whether that's a pediatrician, a child care provider, a caseworker, a home visitor, lets the family know that, you know, if there is anything in here that is that either, you know, doesn't make sense, you don't understand, you're uncomfortable with, you know, either they can reach out and talk to you about it, or even just letting them know that, because one of the things with the ASQ tools is there's a set of materials that, you know, that are needed in order to do some of the activities. And so just letting them know, like, hey, if you don't have those materials, that's okay. You can substitute it for something else. So I think just letting them know that in advance, also letting them know they can skip a question. And so just letting them know that they have those flexibilities available to them would be important to share.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Anything else that comes up when you think of culture and the tools? Okay, we'll have time for some, there's a couple more examples that I'll be sharing as we move on, and I think some of our participants will as well. So I think what I'll do is move through the technical report. So these are all actually slides that I pulled directly from when you sat through either the ASQ3 or the ASQSE training. This is information you would have received then. So this is just for a quick review to remind folks that, you know, the tools, so the ASQ has actually gone through several revisions, and the most recent version now is the ASQ3. And what they do is they norm it on a subset of the population, and they try to match for things like gender, ethnicity, you know, and other demographic information. And so when they do that, they try and get what's called a normative sample, so a sample that closely matches the population. And so if you look at the race and ethnic data, what you'll see is, so this is based on the US Census. So these are the categories that are used. Then this shows you the number of each in each category. The ASQ sample percentage, so that's the percentage in that category, and then based on the 2007 census percent estimate. So if you look at the first row, the number of people who identify as Caucasian or white, the ASQ you know, sampled 9,000, which is 66% of the ASQ sample. And in the US at that time, 2007, 79.9% identified as Caucasian or white. And so what they're trying to do is basically get the number in the ASQ sample percent and the numbers in the census percent to be fairly close. They're not ever going to be exact, but they try and get it as close as they can. So then they can say, well, we sampled a fairly representative group. And then, you know, same with the SE, they did the same, went through the same process. So they used about 3,000 questionnaires. They looked at the demographic data, and then they tried to get a close enough match to, and this was for the 2000 US Census. Doing this type of analysis is incredibly time intensive and costly, and which is why the data hasn't been updated since then. So if you're wondering why did they use, why are they using the 2000 and the 2000 census? It takes so many resources to do this type of study that they don't do it often. Okay, so one research study that I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about because it's pretty unique and it has some very interesting information is a study that was conducted in 2010. And you actually have the full report of this study in your packet if you want to read it in its entirety. It's a pretty interesting read. But I'll just talk a little bit about what some of the findings were. So what they did is they wanted to look at how the ASQ works with different refugee and immigrant population groups in Alberta, Canada. And they picked these groups because there's a fairly robust representation of the Sudanese, South Asian, and Chinese groups in Alberta, Canada. And they used the 18-month ASQ3 with these groups. And this research was conducted with in collaboration with a number of community partners, but it was led, I think, by the University of Alberta, was the lead researcher. And then they partnered with a number of different health organizations in order to complete the study. And they wanted to really look at how well the ASQ worked with children and families from diverse backgrounds, and in particular, these three groups. And what they found in doing this study is they came up with three sort of themes that emerged. And one of those was they noticed a difference between some groups, or mostly in Western groups, the value of independence versus interdependence. And so what they found was that, in Western cultures, there tends to be more of a value on independence, on children being able to do things by themselves. And in many other ethnic groups, the value is more on interdependence and, working in community. And so an example of this would come up around self-feeding. So in the 18-month questionnaire, there's some questions around, can your child, feed themselves and whatnot. And in some cultures, it is an act of caregiver bonding to hand feed a child, right? That is part of what is valued. Also, in some cultures, the idea of allowing a child to eat themselves might mean more wasted food, right? More mess and more wasted food. And so some cultures, have a lot of importance on we don't waste food, or we don't have the resources to waste food. I know in my family, that was a big thing. We never wasted food. You never threw away food. And so, if you're going to allow a young child to self-feed, there's going to be more wasted food and more mess. And so it just really depended on where their values were around that. Another theme that came up was around quantification versus organic development. So this showed up in the examples they gave were in Western cultures, there tends to be more value on quantifying things like how many words can the child say? How many blocks can they stack? And in other cultures, the value was more on just, more free flowing and more recognition that, children develop in different paces and they don't all have to say 20 words by the time they are 18 months, and more on, can I understand what they're trying to say versus how many words are they actually using to say that? Another issue that came up here was, as many of you who are, multilingual know, when you translate something, it doesn't always translate exactly. You don't always use the same number of words. So what you might say, a 4 or a 5 word sentence in English might translate to a 2-word or a 15-word sentence in another language. And so, it's not possible to make that same, it's not a 1-for-1 translation there. So the importance more is on, can I understand what they're saying versus how many words? And so sometimes people aren't really noticing things like how many words. That's not something that they're noticing or capturing. And then the third big theme that came up was around exposure. And so what they found was that, there are certain materials that the tools, use, such as eating utensils or writing utensils. Not sure where that's coming from, if someone could mute. And that, again, with the feeding, not all cultures or families introduce eating utensils at that age. They may, use hand feeding, or, not, if they're not self-feeding, then if the parents using those, so that children themselves aren't being exposed to those types of tools. And so that's where, again, it goes to, like, if we're looking for, self-feeding skills, is that really something that's appropriate in this culture? And then the last point, which I think is obvious and doesn't need research to support it, but, of course, the families reported a positive experience when the administrator was culturally sensitive. So when the administrator came in and asked questions, didn't make assumptions, allowed for flexibility, adapted questions, omitted questions, that is when the families reported a more positive experience around that. So I'm going to pause there because I know we have somebody who is here today who can share a little bit about her experience as a parent who received the ASQ for her child, and how it kind of touched on some of these themes. So Heidi, if you are available to share your story, we'd love to hear from you. Heidi, I can't hear you. I don't know if others can.
Hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Okay, great. So doing the ASQs, coming from a Navajo background, living on the reservation, we're lucky if the parents or the grandparents raising the children have a high school education. So when it came to doing ASQs, keeping an eye on things, as far as one instance would be, is your child able to point, show what they want off the shelf, like what cereal do you want? Recognizing those things, I never knew that was something that I had to look out for with my son. I didn't realize, I just assumed, kids pick that up on their own. And being in a Native American household, we weren't really aware of, one, ASQs, two, developmental delays and stuff like that wasn't really something that we discussed or was brought up in the home. That wasn't really recognized or brought to the parents' attention until the kids were in a school environment, first grade or second grade. And if the parents had the knowledge or wanted the interest to know more, then they would have to ask. But most of the time, the families would just be like, well, we'll just give it time, or he'll change. But having the ASQs, and now with home visiting and many different programs that the tribes have offer home visiting, and they do the ASQs because we want to, one, help the child, because most likely the child is dealing with frustration in the home, and that stresses out the parents. But then two is to start intervention early enough to help them, or just make the parents more aware, so it's something they can practice with their child. Or after a few months, if they do the ASQ again, if there was a significant in the child as well.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for sharing that. And it just really highlights, again, the importance of, like, what is it that certain cultures or certain families might value, might emphasize, and, what are they noticing and what are they not noticing based on their own beliefs and values. And so, again, all the way back to let's not make assumptions, let's just ask questions, and then find different ways to screen for certain skills that we want children, we want to know that they are on track with their development, but knowing that on track for development might look different in different cultures. Does anybody else, and Angelina, I know that you also are said that you would be happy to share, and I don't know if you have something at this point that you would like to share with us.
Yes, thank you. I think in my experience doing the ASQs and also having my own children and, learning from the perspective of a client than coming into as a home visitor, I think for me, and just putting this out there, I come from a very big family of like a melting pot of many different cultures, nationalities, race, everything. I was raised in many different homes of family members that sometimes their cultures kind of contradict the other. And you always, like I said, be mindful, open-minded, like I said previously, because what works in one home might not work in the next. And I think for me, what I've learned working with diversity, different, because we mainly work with Native Americans in our program and Native Hawaiians, but also being in the Oakland area and how diverse families are and how much there's many different, could be African American households with Native American, it could be Native Hawaiian with Hispanic. So there's many different ways that not just one household has always one way of doing it. And in my experience, I've dealt with, I remember this, I'm just going to tell like a little story of one family I worked with. And one of the families, they were a mixed family. They came, the mom was Hispanic, the dad was Native, and I think Hispanic as well. But there was the cultural of, like, I remember it's also the grandparents, they feed the babies. They do not, babies do not feed themselves, even toddlers. I think my client's son is 3 now. I think if he's still with grandma, she feeds him. She's like, I got you with the bowl and the fork, and she feeds him. And he, based on the ASQs, the screeners, there were certain things that were kind of yellow flag, red flag, just certain things that, you would want to talk to the family about and kind of see if there's extra steps that they want or we can take. And I remember after talking to the family, and I was like, hey, I just want to talk to you about this and just kind of figure out in what ways does their son, like, can he do the little pincher grass? Can he, pick up and put something like in another container? Can he feed like cereal on a, a string? There's certain things. And when it came to eating and it came to doing things by himself, he didn't do. And it wasn't because he wasn't capable, I guess you could say. It was just culturally, grandma took care of it. That was the baby. He was very loved on, still is. But then there was different ways. Well, okay, well, what if we try to do, like, we put little toys like cars down and we try to tell him to go like this or with the 2 fingers and see if he's willing to make it a game and see if he picks up like a little crane and puts into the toy box. And so she ended up doing that, and he thought it was the funniest thing. He pretended he was like one of those bulldozer thingies and did that and put it in the little toy box. And it was just one of those where it was like being mindful and being open-minded that, with my own, I actually have a almost 11-month-old, my youngest, and I let him feed himself, and it is horribly messy, and it is horribly like, and it's hard, but he loves it. It's adorable. Just the cleanup and the mess is not adorable. But in one hand, I have a very close friend who doesn't have her son, who's 2 months younger, feed himself try. She feeds him. which is it's fine. He'll get it eventually. Just like my son will get utensils eventually. In my household, we don't use utensils. We use our hands for a lot of things. Culturally, that's how I was raised in certain households. So it's just being mindful that if they're not meeting it right now, there's different ways to do it, and or being patient, because not every kid's on the same page developmentally at the same time. It could take them a couple months later, earlier. You never know. Sorry, that was rambling.
No, thank you. Thank you, Angelina. You hit on so many points that we've been talking about throughout today already. And yeah, I think it just comes down to, you know, there isn't one right way. And the onus is on us as administrators of the tool or supporters of the tool, if we're having families do it on their own, to just be really aware of that, to give examples, to you know, be creative and think about, well, what are some other ways that a skill can be demonstrated, or just allowing for, okay, understanding that that's not something that is done in this family. And so it's an exposure issue. It's not a skill issue, it's an exposure issue. I know one of the items, I believe this comes up in the, can't remember if it's 3 or 4-year-old, but it starts asking about cutting with scissors. And lots of the families that I used to work with, they didn't have child scissors around. And so these were kids who had never tried using scissors before. And so I would go in there and, you know, I would come in with my little ASQ kit, and that does have a pair of scissors. And it was the first time that a child was was trying these. And so that is clearly a lack of exposure issue. It doesn't mean that they don't have the skill, that they can't develop it, but they just hadn't been exposed to it. The beading one that you mentioned, Angelina, that's another big exposure one, right? The one where it asks, can your child string some beads together? That's something that, you know, a lot of families don't have that. And if their child is at home and not going into a group care, you know, or a daycare where those types of activities might exist, they just might not have any exposure to it. And so, again, we have to be aware of that. Having said that, one of the things that I do also say is that with the ASQ3 in particular, because that's looking at these concrete developmental skills, in order to score in the of concern area, the child does have to be, you know, missing quite a few things. So I don't want to leave people with the impression that if a child does score in the of concern, you know, it doesn't matter, because I do think that does warrant some further investigation, but it just means what type of investigation, you know, and being really clear on, is this exposure? Is it culture? Is it family values? Or did we really try and look at these skills and we're not seeing them at all? And so, you know, again, with the screener, it's really looking at, should we be looking further, or can we wait and see? And so, you know, we do want to take an of concern with some amount of seriousness. But, you know, going back to, like, let's just make sure we are thinking outside of the box and asking the right questions. I'm just going to check the chat really quick. I don't know if there were any questions. Yeah. Understanding the developmental milestones. Exactly, Amy. Okay, so kind of as a way to summarize in terms of cultural adaptability, as we've talked about, and as many of you have mentioned, the tool does allow for a lot of flexibility. And so there are alternative administration methods. You know, again, because it's a soft tool, because it's a screener, you know, you can administer it in, you know, different locations. You can use different materials than what's suggested. You know, the normative sample does include a diverse population. You can omit items and still come up with a valid score. You can also translate the ASQ. So I know it's, available. I believe when I used to use it a lot, it was available in obviously English, Spanish, and I want to say, was it Vietnamese and French or Korean and French? However, it hasn't been validated in those languages. But I used to use it with Hindi speaking populations as well, and I would just translate it on my own into Hindi. So you can do that as well. It's not going to be validated in any of those other languages, but at least it's something that you can use with families in a different language. So that is nice. And then also for children who are families who are bilingual or multilingual, I believe one of the handouts in your packet talks about that and how to be just aware of how expressive language will show up differently for children who are learning more than one language at home. So one of the things that we know is that their receptive language tends to be on track, but expressive language might look a little bit different for multilingual children. And so being aware of that when you're using the tool and, trying to decide, well, what language should I use it in? Obviously use it in the language that the child is feels most comfortable in and the family feels most comfortable in. But even then, knowing that the expressive language might look like it's delayed. However, research shows that by age 4, their expressive and their receptive language actually tends to be stronger than children who are monolingual. So just keeping those types of things in mind as well is really important. Okay, let me just check how we are on time. Oh, we're really good on time. Okay. Okay, so I was actually going to pause here as well and see if there's anybody else in our group who has experience either using the tool or a recipient of the tool who has any stories that they could share with us to help us with our understanding and our learning of how to be culturally responsive in using the tool. Or just, thinking about the populations that you work with. And if you're a user of the tool, what are some things that you are aware of or will anticipate in terms of your work with the tool and these families?
I think I'll say something again.
Yeah.
So we also work with a sober living facility, and they're Native women getting clean, from drugs, alcohol, and they have their children with them if they're under like 5 or 6. So while they're on this journey of their sobriety and relearning everything, they're also having to, have their little ones in their face, and the complications and the difficulties that come with getting clean and rechanging habits in life and being a mom at the same time is amazingly hard from my standpoint as the person helping. I know there's been times in the past where, because we do ASQs with them, we usually give them the link. And if they need help, then they would tell us, and then we would, okay, let's do this. I remember this one time though, when I first started working with these women at the facility, and there was this woman who she had, I want to say 4 or 5 kids at home. One was with her because, again, the age. And I smile because it was interesting working with the women and the families that we do normally versus working with the sober living mamas and working with them. And it is very much culturally, because a lot of these women come from reservations. So a lot of it is cultural, but I've noticed a lot of it is the drugs or the alcohol, the lifestyle that they lived, the mindset for so long. So going in, I remember it was 2 times. The first time was like oh, okay, this is a learning experience. The second time I went in with another mom, same time, like this was about a year or 2 ago. And I went in, and this mom was having difficulties with even understanding just certain questions that was being asked, because during this time, she was high or she was drunk and she wasn't coherent. She wasn't, as involved. And the kids were with grandma, or when they were with her, she wasn't obviously aware. And so it brought up some emotional anger about how she felt like we were attacking her, or that we were going to report the results because she's a bad mom, is what her words. And that experience with the ASQs and with women who are experiencing life changes on these journeys to be better people and better parents, I've learned that giving them the space and understanding before you give them the tool goes a long way. And what I mean by that is letting them know ahead of time that this isn't to shame you. This isn't to put you in a category as a good or bad mom. This isn't going to be used against you in court or CPS. This is literally just to see where baby girl or baby boy is, and just ways to help you help them. It's not in any way to make anyone feel less than. We just want to give you the tools so you know how to help them in the long run. That's it. And we're here to support you. So now every time I go into explaining what these surveys or assessments or links or whatever it is, I've learned from that experience to always lay down the foundation of, this is just to give you tools. This is just to give you the knowledge and the advice, and hopefully, if needed, referrals or anything like that to make sure baby girl, baby boy is set up in the future. And it makes you feel secure as a mom to handle that, instead of just, sometimes just going with the flow or ignoring it, or, you're dealing with your own stuff as parents. Life can be overwhelming. And just making sure that no matter what jobs we have, no matter what background we come from, what we struggle with personally, just trying and showing up is probably the best thing we can do for our children. And just by you being willing to talk to me about things that could help your child makes you an exceptional parent, even on the days that you're struggling, sobriety or not. So I just wanted to put that out there because I just remembered it. And that was a big turning point for me, of understanding that generational traumas and, addiction and poverty and just struggle plays a big part in showing up or not showing up, being involved or not being involved, as well as cultural too. You add that into cultural, and it's a big pot. A big pot.
Absolutely, Angelina. You touched on so many important pieces, and I think, one being that, like the population that you just mentioned working with, they have so much going on, and oftentimes they're just trying to make it, right, make it through the day, make it to the next day. And they're just concerned about the basic needs, right? Getting my basic needs met, and thinking about, can my child, say a 6-word sentence or stack 6 blocks, or that is not what's on the forefront of their minds, right? Because how can it be when you're dealing with such huge life issues? And so it really is on the user of the tool, or the administrator, to think about, how do we introduce this in a way that's gentle and appropriate, and respectful given everything that's going on. And yet we know that child development is so important, and we know that early intervention is so important, and we know that, if we can identify things earlier and intervene earlier, we'll have a greater chance. And so that's on our minds. That's what we're thinking about. That, how do we relay that to these families where they've got, so much on their plate? And then the other piece is around trust, and, families who have had such generational and historical negative experiences with not being heard, not being validated, not being safe, being judged, being threatened with, deportation or removal or CPS. They have every right to be concerned about giving information or sharing something that may make it seem like, the situation is less than ideal, right? And so again, that whole, like, the groundwork that is needed to build the safety, build the trust, be respectful, and address the issues, and also bring up child development and the importance of looking at that, and how the tool, would be used as a support and not as a judgment. That takes some work to get to that point, right? And to build that trust. And so I really feel like, yeah, it's again, there's a lot that goes on the user of the tool, and how they choose to use it, and how they choose to roll it out, and how they choose to talk about it. And then what they choose to do with the results, and how that gets shared with the family, and how the family gets involved in that. It's a big sort of structure that all needs to work together in order to reach the kinds of outcomes that we're hoping for. And there were a couple of comments in there about, historical generational trauma, children being removed from their families, which has happened in, this country and other countries as well. Children get removed because families, do things differently than what is considered appropriate in that particular culture. And so they come in and they remove the children. So. Anybody else have any stories or just things that you think might come up in the populations that you work with? I know in the pre-survey, we asked a little bit about what types of populations you work with, and there was a lot of variety. Yeah, Carol, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I would like to share my experience. Yeah, I remember when I was working with in the preschool, and I noticed one of the kids just never take a nap. Yeah, it's not like he's trouble, but he just never take a nap. Even everybody was fall asleep. So I was just check with his parents what's going on. Does he take a nap at home, or how's his sleeping habits? So we just figure out, yeah, his parents sleep with them. He's in a family bed. So that for that boy, he don't feel comfortable. He sleep alone. He need a parents or teacher to hold his hand to lay down with him so that he can rest. So even as a little tiny things like different culture that has different so they maybe have a different way to in their family lifestyle, like family bed or something like there are very strict schedules for when they are little one. When I was baby and until they are 3, the parents still follow very strict schedules. So if they don't follow that routine, they cannot settle down themselves. So yeah, it's not super dramatic, but it could be happen to the older kids if they come different cultures. So be a teacher or parents, I mean, so be a teacher or early childhood teacher, we need to aware like, all the observation from parents' view and figure out what's going on with the kids. Then we can better understand. Yeah, not follow up the ASQ, they just experience different family culture things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that actually comes up in the ASQSE around sleep habits and sleep patterns. And, for a child who is used to sleeping in a family bed and sleeping, with others as a way to self-regulate and to calm and feel relaxed enough. And then they're, at the school and they're given their little mat and they're, in a room with a bunch of kids and yeah, it can feel very dysregulating. And as opposed to seeing that as, oh, this child has sleep issues, really exploring like, well, what is going on? And so thinking about like, let's ask, in the family, are they sleeping at home? And that gives you all this information. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really important point. I remember one time I was using the ASQ for a young child, and I went to go on the home visit, and this family of 6, they were living in a converted garage. So it was a garage, so it's the size of a garage, a family of 6, and they had one bed, right, one large bed in there, and that's where they all slept. Their kitchen and their bed, like everything was just in this one room, and it was on a busy street. And the child had very little opportunity to play outside and really develop gross motor skills. And so, just things like that, like just having visited the home and getting a sense of what the home environment looks like and what the setup is and what the expectation is. Like they had a family bed as well, gave me so much more information than if the family had come in, for example, to my office or to a clinic and we were doing the ASQ that way. I would have missed this big piece of information. Of course, I would have asked more, but it's a different thing when you like actually see it. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people in a really small space and not a lot of opportunity to move around. Right. Anybody else have a story to share or a thought here?
I have a story to share.
Yeah.
So a Native American Health Center has a program called Strong Family. And I was actually a participant of the program when I had my daughter. Part of being a part of the program, we are given the ASQs. So I was doing the ASQs for my daughter. My daughter, I answered all the questions, and then we had my son, and I was doing the ASQs for him, but I realized that I wasn't hitting certain marks as quickly as I was through my daughter, because I know with my daughter, I was just going through the pages. Yeah. But then with my son, I really had to think about some of the questions that were asked. And like you mentioned earlier, was like the words he's saying. And I was like, well, he doesn't really say much. But he was hitting those physical milestones. Like he's super active kid, wasn't talking, but he could understand us. Like if we told him close the door, he would close the door or go throw it in the trash. So I really didn't think, but I realized he wasn't talking where his talking wasn't where it should be. Or he was saying mom and dad at the beginning, but then he stopped. So if it wasn't for these ASQs and doing them so vigilantly, I wouldn't have known that my son was on the spectrum of autism. Our home visitor, brought up to us like, hey, this is where he scored. We have a little concern. And I was like, okay. So I brought it up to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician's like, okay, great. She's like, great. She's like, I'm glad that you're doing the ASQ. She was surprised that I even knew that they were even out there. And I said, I do them for this program I'm part of. My son didn't hit these marks, and she's like, okay. And then she sent out the referral and we got him tested, and sure enough, he was on the spectrum for autism. So I really know, even though you might not seem like the kids aren't visually hitting those aspects, so I think also it's they're hidden from in most families, especially if you have multiple kids. When my son was developing, as a parent, again, I was comparing him to all other kids, but I had to realize like each kid is different, and having that understanding really helped me. And I think when we found out when he was on the spectrum, for me, I'm one to, okay, what do we do next? Some families, get that kind of information, and they're kind of like, they stop and they're like, well, we'll wait another year and see what happens. Or, no, that's not right. That's just how he is, and not really want to accept. But for me, it's like, well, why not do, therapy? Why not get him speech therapy? Because worst comes to worst, they work with him and they're like, oh no, he's fine. He doesn't really need it. And then it'll be like, okay, he doesn't need it, then let's find something else that, that would work better, or something that he does need to help him develop. And we were lucky enough to start early intervention for him at the age of 3. And this year he started kindergarten. So we're really excited for how much he's grown, and is learning so much in the home with his ABA therapy, and along with school as well.
Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, so that really illustrates how, if the ASQ is showing that there is something of concern, it's worth looking into and exploring that a little bit more, because you don't want to miss something. You don't want to just sort of brush it off or miss something. And like I had said earlier, to score of concern on the ASQ, does mean that that their cutoff is 2 standard deviations below the norm. And so it does feel like, it's worth exploring and following up. But like you said, you are a parent who was like, sure, let's go, let's take that next step. And not all parents or caregivers feel that way. And some of them really are like, oh, I want to wait, or, let's just see. I often feel like, especially if it is the family's first child, they may not have, points of comparison. And so sometimes they don't, realize, like I had a family who had a almost 4-year-old who was, monolingual English speaking and wasn't really talking much, but this family just didn't realize that is something that, by that age, we do expect to see some more language, versus if they've had, other children, or they've been around other children, then they may have more of an understanding or of what, types of milestones we do hope to see. But I think it just goes back to your point of meeting every family where they're at, and being respectful of, how they want to proceed or don't want to proceed, and being able to just say, I'm here to support you. And, I can tell you what, I can give you an informed opinion and support you. But it's ultimately your decision and your choice to make. Carol, I see that you have your hand up, and then I know that there is a question in the chat that I'll get to as well.
Yes, I just want to echo Hindy's the opinions, because we do some training for provider for communicating with family when concerns arise, because we do for myself, I was a childcare provider also. I totally understand parents send their kids to the family childcare, to the school, to the center, but they don't feel, they only probably have one, or maybe it's their first case. They don't really understand how their kids different from others. But for the teachers, for providers' points of view, we see many children. So we may know that the kids are little concerns in the red flag or yellow flag. So we want to, sometimes be a providers or early childhood teacher, we really want to communicate with parents, but parents, they don't ready yet. They of course they will deny or later say, oh, I was like that way when I was a little, when I was a 2 year or 3 years old, I never taught, or I'm always defeating with the cultural things, something like that. But in here, we really want the kids, if they are in the certain concerns, like Hini said, we really want to give their early interventions. We don't want to wait for until 5 years old, they are going to school and they have a trouble, they have a communicating problems. But for provider, it's really tough questions, really tough concerns. Always, they have to open their mind. They have to open their fear to talk to parents and ask parents to talk to their pediatricians. But yeah, I can see a lot of provider willing to do that because they really concerned about the kids they take care. They really think about how to do the best education for their kids, for their parents too. So it's kind of like a bridge. We have to help providers to over the fears and also help the parents tell them, you don't need to be feared if you have your child has a concern, because we have a tool to help you. The more tool they have, the more resource they have, they'll be willing to to see their kids just different. That's okay. Every kid has they're unique. It doesn't big deal if their kids is you'll be a special needs or something. Yeah, we just want to, I think we'll best our education just help the parents to overcome the fears.
Yeah, I like the bridge analogy. I think, that's a lot of what we're doing is just kind of being a bridge for them and showing them like, here are your options. What do you think makes sense based on what you know your child the best, your family the best. And so being a bridge to what those different options are and a support. I saw the question in the chat around, deciding when to do an ASQ in home versus in office. And it seems like there's a lot of great responses to it already. And I agree. Like, I think it depends on, what the family feels most comfortable with. As an administrator, I always, enjoy going into the home if the family is okay with it, because it does just offer you a lot of information that you can get outside of the home, but it's a quick way to get a lot of information and just to kind of get a sense of what the environment is like and who else is in the home. But as others have said, not all families are comfortable with that. And so I think it's just meeting them where they're at. I don't think there is like a gold standard or a best way. It just kind of depends on what the family's comfortable with. Okay, so, I see there's another hand raised. Carrie, hi.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Carrie Bacho, and currently I'm an early literacy manager of a program. So I'm like, everyone's thinking, well, how are you using the ASQs? Well, back in 2004, I was the coordinator of a play group sponsored by First Five Marin. And they said, create this play group because your goal is to make sure that children between the ages of 0 and 5 and their families are ready to enter kindergarten, ready to learn, with all the skills that are needed. So I'm like, how am I going to create a play group that's going to prepare children? I didn't want it just to be about getting together and socializing, which has its benefits, but I wanted to be more meaningful. So I think, I don't know if it was 2004, 2005, I decided I'm going to use the ASQs to learn a little bit about each one of these families to be able to create a curriculum that was meaningful for each family, and help them develop all those areas. Well, it really helped me. And like everyone here has learned through doing this and working with families from different cultures, I made sure to use or create experiences in the playgroup and that were relevant to the different cultures, which wasn't always perfect, but the effort was there and it was appreciated. And also to use certain materials. And when you discussed about food and how precious it is, but even more so for certain cultures, I always made sure not to use food because I wanted to be respectful, and to use items that parents can use at home to recreate those experiences. Anyhow, I had anywhere from 50 to 80 families every Wednesday for an hour and a half. So, so times two, right? We're looking at 160 people in this room at once. Extremely beautiful, multicultural. It was incredible. But the ASQ, I'm dating myself because it was probably the first one that came out. But the reason why I'm here today is because even though I have a different position, we are looking for a playgroup coordinator for this new playgroup. But meanwhile, I'm going to be filling in with an assistant. So I want to go ahead and make sure that everyone takes the ASQ again, so I know where and what areas I really need to work on in this playgroup. So I'm like, love ASQ. It helped me to help our families.
Thank you. That is thank you for sharing that and how you were able to implement it in that role where you know, like as you started off saying, like, why would you be using that tool? But so yeah, it is. I agree in that it is. It's a really flexible tool, and you can get really creative with it. So it's one of the reasons why, you know, I've kind of stuck with it through the years and have enjoyed training on it and talking about it because I do feel like, yeah, it allows for a lot of flexibility. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move us forward. So we have in your packet, you have something called a self-awareness activity, and it's a one pager with I think about 6 brief statements. And if you all could just take 2 minutes or so to read through, and then you're going to mark your comfort level with each of those statements. And then we're actually not going to break up into small groups just yet. We will, you know, have a chance to just share any reflections or thoughts that come up after this, and then we'll break into small groups after that. So just go ahead, and if you can pull that up, Leah's put the link to it in the chat, as well as the actual document you can download from there. And if you don't have a physical copy of it, that's fine. You can even just read through it and just think about how you would respond. So let's just take about 2 minutes to do that. All right. So any just initial thoughts or reactions that come up for you?
I think for myself, the one that was the hardest for me, or maybe the least comfortable for me, was the one where it says that the parents tell their son that he has shamed the family. I think that is a hard one for me personally.
Yeah, I think that one tends to get a lot of reaction from people. And, you know, especially, you know, I think the idea of like a child being representative of their family and how they conduct themselves is a reflection on the whole family is, you know, very different concept than what we tend to be accustomed to. Yeah, the breastfeeding the 3-year-old. And a lot of these are, you know, yeah, just what our own comfort level is, our own expectation, our own, you know, values and way of being brought up. Yeah, the strict schedule for a 1-month-old.
For me, the first two, um, would be, well, when the kids are sick, they sleep with us. And then my daughter and son, they like to sleep together, and so that's just a comfort level for them. And then also my daughter, when she was little, we could hardly, she would wake up the minute you lay her down. So it was one of those, like, if we, fingers crossed that we could rock her, roll her out, and put her in and let her move, and we could get up off the bed without her waking up, that was huge. But for the most part, yeah, we had umpteen pillows underneath our arms holding her, because she just, I don't know if it was just the warmth or knowing she was being held, that it was really hard for us. So those two, super comfortable with. But yeah, and then the strict family schedule, visiting, home visiting the different families, especially when they have infants, and off being a mom herself, I'll go off of their schedule. If the baby's gonna be awake, I'll come when the baby's gonna be awake, or call when the baby's gonna be awake, because I understand how precious those times are, or the downtime is in a home. So I will make my schedule available to her and the child.
Right. Yeah. So then you're just talking about different things work for different families, right? Like maybe a family would like to have their child, sleep on their own because it's better for their own sleep, but that is not what's working. The child isn't, allowing that to happen. And so they, adapt to do something else. So it's so much of it is, specific to that family and what's going to work for them. I'll share that as a mom of twins. I had twins, and when they were really little, it was really important to me to get them on a schedule as quickly as possible and to have them sleep at the same time, because if they weren't sleeping at the same time, like I never got a break. And so I started, as early as I could with like getting them to eat at the same time, getting them to sleep, because that's what I needed for my own sanity. So, just being really aware that there could be different reasons, different factors playing into why families do something. Flexibility, yeah. Flexibility and scheduling with little ones is a big thing. So I think I'm going to just, in the interest of time, because I want to give folks enough time to work on the vignette and have some time with each other. So the other thing you have in your packet is a short vignette. It's about 2 paragraphs. And this is actually adapted a little bit from an experience that I had. And so I want you all to, we're going to break you up into some small groups in breakout rooms. You'll have a chance to read the vignette, and then we're going and then discuss. I think the questions will show up here. So please discuss, what are your initial reactions, thoughts, and feelings you might be having as the mother in the vignette, and initial reactions, thoughts, and feelings as the grandmother in this vignette. So trying to put yourself from the perspective of the mother and the grandmother. So Leah did drop the vignette into the chat. You also have it in your folders. And yeah, can we put the questions in the chat, Leah? I know that you and I had talked about that.
Okay. So we are all set to open up the breakout rooms. Is everybody good with what's going to happen? Okay, and then be sure to, if you don't have your camera and mic open, go ahead and open your camera and your mic.
So, so the questions were, thinking about it from the perspective, the thoughts, feelings, reactions of the mom, of the grandmother, and then actually what I wanted to kind of bring us all back to just see what came up in your groups, and also, now you've had a chance to think about it from their perspective. So then as an ASQ administrator, what might you be taking into consideration, and what cultural adaptations might you be thinking about with this family? So I'm just going to open it up for any of that, any of you to share either what came up in your group or what you might be thinking about as an administrator of the tool with this family.
Hi. I think I didn't actually during our group, I didn't think about it as me administering the ASQ. I thought about it strictly as the mom or the grandmother. And I was having difficulty with that too, because, you know, I've been in that position. And so it's also one of those where it's like, but now when you said that just out loud right now, I feel like that would be a slippery slope if you're not careful, because obviously the mother-in-law, you know, has a lot of say so. It's her household. She is the one that is in charge of the household. And she's the one who, you know, a lot of the elders in my family, you know, you give them respect because they've lived longer, they've raised many kids. Whether they're right or wrong, it's hard sometimes to get them to see without being disrespectful. So I think for me, I would definitely see if I would be able to do one with the mother-in-law present and one without, just to kind of give the respect. I don't know if that's allowed or appropriate, but to me, I feel like that would be good to see grandma, see how, you know, maybe she can open her mind and see, oh, so wait, kids are supposed to be doing this at this age, and not make it against her, she's wrong type of thing. And then maybe having mom do it so she can hopefully build up some confidence to respectfully, you know, I don't want to put her foot down, I guess you could say, but respectfully, because sounds like mother-in-law is in charge.
Yeah, very important considerations there. And you know, thinking about, I think that the crux of this is how do you do this while, you know, being respectful of the family structure that's in place, right? Like you're seeing things that are concerning, you know, 11-month-old who's having trouble with movement and who by this age should have some of that, but being very respectful of the family structure that's in place. So other thoughts, ideas?
In our group, we just came up with alternatives on how we would be able to assist the family better, like with the grandma suggesting, you know, putting down a blanket, because it could have been, she was raised, you know, she could have been raised in Mexico or somewhere where the environment wasn't very good for kids to play on the ground. But that was a suggestion. And then Kelly made a suggestion, you know, her mom was the same way, you know, making sure she doesn't play on the ground or sitting on the floor, just because people walk on it and it's dirty. But Kelly mentioned, if you don't mind, she says her mom cleans the floor all the time and vacuums. She's like, why can't I sit on the floor now? But you know, it's something that we're raised in, that we've seen in our homes, if not ours, our relatives. So it's just common to make suggestions. And then we just made just suggestions as far as like the bottle feeding, switching that up, especially with the child is seeing a dentist, that would have brought up. Carol made that suggestion. So it was just mainly coming up with alternatives for the family.
Yeah, I think that, you know, taking that into consideration, like the why behind something, right? So like, why is there a concern about the child being on the floor? And, you know, we don't know where that's coming from. Is it because it's not considered clean? You know, maybe, you know, like I'm thinking about the family that I visited who they were living in a converted garage and there was, you know, was no carpeting, and, you know, like that's not really the type of space you would want to put a young child on. So it could be multiple reasons that's frowned upon. So just really learning the why behind something and then coming up with, okay, so now that I understand the why, maybe let's think together about what else could work that meets that need.
Another one was Carol's was maybe the house wasn't baby proof, and that's why the grandmother felt like the house wasn't safe enough for the child to move around. And that, that's a huge one for a lot of families, is being aware of the child's safety in a home.
Exactly, right. So again, like the why behind it. Is it a safety concern? Is it a health concern? If it's a very small space and people have, items out that are not child safe, right? Then they might not want the child moving around freely in that space. So could be multiple reasons for not allowing the child to move freely or to be on the floor. We only have like another minute. So if there's any last thoughts about the vignette.
Yes, I would like to share some concerns also. Like Andreas, he's very heavy for his age. So yeah, so for the parents' point of view, we really want kids to be healthier. So all the on their development age. So if they take their kids to the pediatrician, they probably will get some advice from the pediatrician how to raise a healthy baby, improve the weight, improve the growth development. So for his age, if he's very heavy for his age, maybe he will be warning about when he going young adult or going to adult, then he will be have some health concerns. Also about the grandmoms, the environments put the TV on most all the times. So let me say it still mean that all the noise, all like the medias all the time. So yeah, if I were mom, I would really worry about that in situation. Yeah, so we do have any alternative way to helping kids keeping it busy, not only for the TVs, because I think for grandparents, they thought the baby don't understand. They'll be okay. Just take care of ourselves first, take care of our entertainment first. Put the music, put the TV on all the time to entertain my kids and myself. But actually, that won't be a good environment for babies, of course, even for the baby young age. So I think that too should be concerns too.
Yeah, that's a good point about, is this a good opportunity to loop in the pediatrician and, have sort of another perspective. And there might be a little more willingness, to especially if it's really focused on health and safety to hear from a pediatrician. I know it's 11 and some people have had to jump off. Feel free to jump off if you need to. If anybody has a question and wants to stay on, I'm available for the next few minutes. So I'll go ahead and stay on for any questions that remain. But if you have to jump off, feel free. And thank you so much for your time and your interest in this topic. I appreciate all of you being here and your participation.
I just want to take a moment to say thank you, Sujata, for this wonderful and engaging presentation and conversations with folks. I also want to thank Native American Health Center and Angelina and Heidi for taking the time to be with us today and really sharing out their experiences, and for all of you for joining us today to really making this a real engaged training for today. So I really want to thank you all. And then I look forward to seeing you folks in our upcoming trainings. Take care and have a nice day.
Thank you for an amazing presentation, but I wanted to ask a question. I too like to do the ASQs with the family. And so when I'm asking the parents questions and they'll say, oh, yes, he can do that. Or and I'll say, oh, okay, then, let's play this game here and do this to demonstrate the skills. And often the child is not doing what the parent says they are doing. And I'll point out, oh, I see that, he's struggling a little here, but he's doing this, not quite that. But in other areas where you ask the parent a question and you're observing something very different than what the parent is reporting, what do you put on the ASQ?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in those situations, I will say, oh, okay, so, I'm not seeing that right now. Is this something that you have observed? And then I'll ask them to give me a little bit more information. Can you tell me when you've observed it, how you've observed it? If we're not in their home, for example, it might just be that the child's not comfortable, or child is aware that they're being observed, and so we know that they're less likely to do something. So I will just ask the parent a few more questions, and if I feel like they can really give me a substantive answer and really describe what that they've seen the skill, I will go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to put this as a yes or as a sometimes, and I'll kind of just make sure that's okay with them, because we didn't see it here today, but you're telling me. So, but if I feel like, I'm asking them questions and they're really kind of hesitating, then I'll be more likely to be like, well, can we put that as is that okay with you to put it as a sometimes? Because, I would like to see the skill or something. And so I'll just kind of check it out with them. And but if they feel pretty adamant that, no, I've seen this, I know that they can do it, then I will go ahead and put it as a yes, because ultimately it is, a parent report.
Reporting, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you again.
Thank you for being here.
All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It was a lot of great information. My question is, we work with diverse communities here, and the religious aspects, different religion aspects play in that. And sometimes people say, hey, everything's in God's hand, it's God's will. And also they are concerned, they could be concerned, or I could be concerned about stigma or any records being put on my child's information or their child's information. How do you go around how do you go about this concerns or family concerns?
Family concerns. Yeah. I mean, that is a common one around stigma, labeling, wanting to not give a sense that anything, could be outside of the realm of typical. I think when that happens, it's really about building that safety and the trust with the family, and kind of going back to, if we go in with the assumption that every parent wants the best for their child, that they're there really because they ultimately want their child to be successful and to progress, and holding that in mind, that is the ultimate goal. Then I think aligning around that and being able to say, like, I know that you want what's best for your child, and I do too. We have a common goal, and what can we do together to reach that? If you feel like the relationship is there, I tend to be pretty transparent and honest with my families and say, I don't know you are the expert on your child, but I have expertise in child development in general. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of children, and, I'm concerned because this is what I'm seeing, but your child the best. So if it's not a concern to you, and you want to wait, I don't know the structure of your program, but if it's the type of program where you are able to have additional touch points with the family, like we can check back in 2 months or in 3 months, and let's see how things are. And here are some activities to do in the meantime. So it doesn't have to lead to a referral or a next step. It can just be something as like, here's some ideas, here's some activities that you can try. These activities will support your child in all areas of their development. If that's something you're open to, I'll leave you with these activities and then let's touch base again so that you are having an additional opportunity. And sometimes that's just what it takes because they're not ready at that point to move forward with a referral or an intervention or a treatment. And so ultimately you have to just meet them where they're at and, go with what they're most comfortable with, and then continue to build that relationship and that trust and continue to have touch points with them. And I think that, that will go a long way to, and I think validating too, validating the concern, like, yeah, I understand the fear or the concern around having a label or having a stigma, and exploring that further. What does that mean to you? What are you worried about? And just exploring that a little bit could be helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are
You're
great
welcome.
points.
You're welcome, Mandy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the training. That was really awesome. Thank you, Hindi, for your sharing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks.